let's get into a supposed DApp that has actually rocked the crypto world and is like, making all the news right now, is the collapse of FTX. FTX, as far as I'm aware, was an exchange, so it's kind of a bank account. It's kind of like a bank without being a bank. Is that right?
Well, it really shouldn't be like that. That's a lot of the problem of what actually occurred with it. So I guess just to sort of understand what an exchange is, it's sort of very simply exactly what it sounds like. So an exchange, a cryptocurrency exchange, is where you go and exchange your sovereign currency dollars, so whether that's Australian dollars or US dollars, for a particular cryptocurrency. Now, a big part of the problem with FTX is that they actually also offered custody of these cryptocurrencies. Okay, so people could effectively leave their cryptocurrencies on that exchange. And
so what you're saying is, does that normally happen with a traditional exchange? Can people leave their money in there?
Okay. And this has been sort of a problem over and over again in cryptocurrency. We've seen exchanges collapse several times. Several large exchanges have collapsed in the past.
What about non-crypto exchanges? Can you keep or is this only unique to crypto exchanges that you can store your money there?
Yeah, so there's two ways you can store your cryptocurrency. One would be on an exchange, which I would never suggest as a place to store your cryptocurrencies, because they are in effect operating like an unregulated bank at this point in time. And as we go through the FTX stuff, we'll see sort of what's been able to happen because these exchanges have been custodying the cryptocurrencies. What should be people's first principle when they come into cryptocurrency is the principle of self-custody. So that is, you have your own wallet, which you could load up onto any device. You could use a phone, you could use a laptop, or what's called a hardware wallet, which is a very secure form of a cryptocurrency wallet. It's sort of disconnected from the internet and very difficult to hack. And if your funds were stored on your own wallet, and if you were self-custodying that cryptocurrency, this could never have occurred, essentially. So that the fact that it is operating kind of like an unregulated bank is the crux of the problem, I would say, with what's occurred here.
So let's give the story. So there's an exchange worth the organization was worth $32 billion, run by a gentleman called Sam Bankman-Fried, right?
Yeah.
If the name didn't give it away at the start, Bankman-Fried. Really? So they've collapsed, and there's a lot of controversy around it. He was touted as being like the most generous billionaire because he was known for just giving money away and all that sort of stuff. Living in the Bahamas with his core business partners, but also they were polyamorous. I always get my tongue tied around that. In relationship, it was just, and then there was another organization called Alameda that was meant to be a separate organization, but there was funds shared between them and so. So there's, from the outside. Now I actually saw that he got in. I saw today that he got interviewed, and there's obviously there's a justification to everything. He responded to everything, but who knows? By the time you watch this, it'll probably all come out. Who knows? But at this stage, it all just sounds messy. And then this organization crashed, and everyone lost their money, or what's happened with it?
Yes, there are currently something like $10 billion of customer funds gone. Potentially the largest financial crime that we know of in history. So a gentleman by the name of John J. Ray III has become the executive of FTX as they go through bankruptcy proceedings. Now, he was, I believe, quite instrumental in overseeing the Enron bankruptcy proceedings. He has labelled the FTX situation worse than Enron, the worst financial situation he's seen in his career. And just a few of the flags he's kind of on record talking about is, okay, so this company, FTX, was worth $32 billion. They had no accountant. They had never had a board meeting. There were 600 employees on the books, most of whom were fake. Customer funds were used to purchase over $1 billion worth of property in Sam Bankman-Fried's name. But customer funds were used without the knowledge of the customers to trade in their trading arm known as Alameda Finance. And obviously, as they started losing trades, they just kept taking more and more funds until it got to the point where
hang on a second, Erin. No. That was just an accounting. That was a mislabeled account, wasn't it? That's what his response is. No, that was a mislabeled account. We forgot that account was owed to FTX customers.
Yeah, mislabeled account. There's quite a few expletives that I could say in response to that. I will hold back. So I guess this isn't just me saying it. This is sort of a professional in the industry, the current CEO of FTX, someone who was majorly involved in Enron, calling this possibly the worst financial disaster that's ever occurred. And I think he called it a complete failure of corporate governance. There were just no safeguards in place, a string of shell companies across the Bahamas, pretty much like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And so it was really in my view.
To play devil's advocate for a moment.
Yeah.
Obviously, this whole space is new, right? There's just it's new people. Like, this person had no experience, none of his team. They're all just coders. They're all just like it's a new generation. They have no experience in governance and all that sort of stuff. Is this not saying is it justified? Is there a place for this whole just run fast and break stuff and just figure it out along the way? To bring this back into leadership, there's a lot of us that are running businesses that are just breaking things along the way. We're just trying to figure it out as we go along. How do you find that balance?
Okay, I want to answer that by just going a little bit further into the rabbit hole, because this whole situation becomes even more weird and wonderful when you recognize that Sam Bankman-Fried was actually the central crypto figure involved in the wider regulatory framework that the US government was attempting to implement. Okay, so he had a number of meetings with Gary Gensler from the SEC, so the Securities Exchange Commission, I think it's called over there. And so in their sort of delineations or their deliberations around how they should be regulating cryptocurrency, he was kind of their guy.
And he was supportive of it, wasn't it? While most of the crypto community is fighting against regulation, because that's the whole point of crypto, he was the one that was kind of fighting or kind of the spokesperson for the benefit of it.
Well, yeah, we can come back to that, because when I think most cryptocurrency enthusiasts are not against the regulation, they're against certain forms of regulation and certain forms of government overreach. But yeah, he was kind of central to this conversation. And while he was in these conversations, he was essentially accusing a number of other sort of cryptocurrency dApps and founders of engaging in the sorts of practices that he himself was engaging in, sort of accusing.
Yeah, wasn't there a public feud between him and Binance?
Yeah, I don't know how much I trust that guy either, because he's operating an offshore exchange, so I don't necessarily think that he's much more clean, although he appears to have implemented better risk management so far, I would say. But he basically was trying to make it so that no other applications in DeFi were able to gain any sort of market share or traction or regulatory approval by accusing them of many of the things he himself was engaged in. So it's just one of these really bizarre situations where, you know, the SEC had actually investigated FTX something like 6 months ago, cleared him, and then used him sort of as their mouthpiece to then begin regulating other applications and other aspects of cryptocurrency. So there's a whole myriad of very bizarre things that happened here, and a lot of very powerful people are involved in it.
You know, I think it would be instructive for a lot of people to read the history of the railroads in the United States, and some of the spectacular failures and the rip-offs and so on that happened in the early days of the railroads. We're seeing it now in this digital environment. So, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. And human beings are subject to all kinds of sin. And the prospect of making a lot of money tends to cause some people to fall into all kinds of sin. And I think that's one of the reasons why we said earlier on that you need to make sure that, particularly in a new market, see, this is a new market, a regulatory framework hasn't developed, and there's argument as to whether or not it even should. There are big risks involved. So there's an upside potential, and certainly if you had bought Bitcoin back in the days when you could buy a whole Bitcoin for 500 Aussie dollars, you'd be sitting pretty today, regardless of how much volatility there's been in the last couple of years. Now, the whole system is so different to what it was when Bitcoin first became available to purchase. And as an economist who knows a little bit about economic history, this is a new market using new technologies. It attracts a lot of people because it is highly speculative. It tends to attract people with a certain sort of personality type, you know, highly charismatic people who are able to sell well and so on. And unfortunately, a lot of people go into these investments believing they're going to make a lot of money, and they listen to nobody's advice. And some do and some don't. And one of the things that happens in these early stages of the development of any new market is what I would call asymmetric information. And there's asymmetric information because people will only tell you about their successes. They won't tell you about their failures. And, you know, from my perspective, and I'm not a real expert in this particular area, we're just seeing what always happens in the early stages of the development of a new market. And that's not to say it's a good thing, because often people who don't have a really strong ethical basis get involved, and they don't mind doing what, for many other people, their religious foundations or their simple maturity in terms of age and experience would caution them against. And I think the kind of behavior we're seeing here, we've seen it all before. We've seen it all before. And so it's not a big surprise to me. And I guess what frustrates me is that I cautioned a lot of people just about taking care and not believing anybody's story about making a huge return, because that is some people's story and some people's story only.
Yeah. Dr. I want to come back to you in a moment and talk about governance, right? But because obviously that's an area of your expertise. But I want to jump onto that point that you were just talking about the type of people that it kind of attracts right now. And I want to kind of speak into this from a psychologist point of view, or from a psychology point of view, Erin, is, you know, I can't quite often say that, you know, our gift is our curse almost, right? Like there's, you know, whatever is our advantage is also a major disadvantage. Would you say that the type of person that is, I suppose, attracted to the risk and the excitement and like the pioneering of something is very similar to that? Like, is it the scammy side of it and the rug pulls and all that sort of stuff that happens, and the the misbehavior and the not best practices, the not best ethical practices. Is it just two sides of the same sword?
No, I don't think I would say that. I would say that like the personality factors involved in like innovation and creativity, we can think about those on sort of the big five personality factor continuum. So, openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism are those five factors. Obviously, anybody who is getting into an industry and a space early is going to be pretty open to experience. They're going to be probably far more open than your average person. They're, maybe going to be more disagreeable. They're willing to go against the herd, go against, what the majority of people are doing. They may be sort of quite low on what we call trait neuroticism, which is an unfortunate word. It just means negative emotions, and they may be less sensitive to negative emotion. And so there, these factors are generally kind of combining in people who are early adopters or early innovators in any space. Now, in terms of people who are willing to take advantage of people, who are willing to commit crimes, who are willing to, really kind of commit sin. I think that's something that happens in all areas and all spaces, and I think you find that that's a fairly stable portion or percentage of the population. It's just that I think their effect in a new space is larger because people are less educated. People perhaps have fewer frameworks to be able to identify who they are, because it could be, I guess, in agreement with what you're saying, that sometimes particularly in cryptocurrency, it can be difficult to tell the difference between a breakthrough disruptive technology that's going to change the world and an outright scam. It actually isn't as easy as you would think to be able to tell those two things apart early on in the piece. So the effect that, somebody who maybe has narcissistic personality disorder or they're a sociopath, their effect, I think, is just magnified in a newer space. That's the way I think about it anyway.
Okay. Then back to my comment earlier about the run fast and break stuff. Like, is that same sort of personality you were saying that is open to being an early adopter and everything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the run fast and break stuff ethic is something that has been rewarded a lot in the tech space thus far. And so, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of very similar personality types, I would say. However, this is obviously a very different type of technology because it's actually dealing with people's money. And if you break something, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, it's billions of dollars in lost capital possibly. And so I think that ethic needs a little bit of review and a little bit of consideration. And that's something that's been discussed a lot in the cryptocurrency community. So, for me personally, I tend to gravitate towards people who take their time with things. It may take them 2 or 3 years to get a project off the ground and develop it. But that wait, that patience, anybody who's able to be patient in this space, it's worth kind of looking at them.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, to the Dr. Odd's point earlier is like, you know what, if you got in early, like I hear people go, oh, it's the market's dropped like 60%, 70%, whatever it is. It's like, yeah, but depending on when you got in, it's still up. And
up 2 million% before that, literally.
Yeah, and Tesla went down 30%. Now, depending on when you invested in it, it's either up or it's down,
Amazon dropped 95% in the .com bubble. So, I think judging things by sort of price and volatility isn't your best measure.
Yeah. Dr. Rod, what's your take for leaders on the run fast and break things concept?
Well, look, I'm risk averse. If I wasn't risk averse, I probably wouldn't be an economist. And as a leader, I guess I don't take big risks. You do need to be aware as a leader, you're a leader because there are people following you.
Yeah.
Either because you have a formal position within an organization or because you have the kind of personal style and personal attributes that cause people to want to follow you. So I do think that even if you do exhibit these behaviors and you have this tendency, you should always bear in mind that you have people following you. And because of that, you've got some responsibility towards them.
Yeah.
I often recall John Maynard Keynes, who was perhaps one of the best known economists who's ever lived, and his influence is still quite substantial on government policy today. He did a lot of investing. Back then, of course, there weren't as many options as we have today. And he invested a lot on behalf of his friends, and he lost a lot of it. In fact, I think he might have lost nearly all of it during the Great Depression. And he resolved to make it all back again, to make good the losses, which he actually did. It took him a long time, but he took responsibility for what had happened, even though he wasn't literally responsible for the Great Depression, of course. But he'd made certain promises to his friends that obviously turned out to be wrong. And then he spent almost the rest of his life, and he died fairly young at 64 years of age, but he almost spent the rest of his life making amends. And I think that's a good lesson for us as leaders.
Yeah, it's good. So I would have to admit that I am a run fast and break things kind of person. Kind of. I'm definitely a run fast kind of person. I don't necessarily think I like to break things as much, but I definitely am more focused on the future than I'll get back to filling out that document later, or I'll let my emails back up because I'm so charging for the future. I think for me, what's actually helped me is having people like yourselves around me, that someone like yourself, Dr. Rod, that is risk averse, someone like yourself, Erin, that keeps my head in check, that just makes sure that I can run fast and not break things and still care for those people that are around me. So I mean, there's a bit of advice for people. Avoid running fast and breaking things. How about you just try to run fast and build things?
Sounds like a great idea. Like, just, I guess, to make it applicable to like the cryptocurrency space, security has to be the number one. If you're a developer in the cryptocurrency space, like, security has to be before absolutely everything else. You need to know your contract is secure, that it can't be hacked, there are no backdoors, that it isn't an easy target for, a criminal mastermind somewhere. Because these things are, it's not like a bank vault or some other physical space where you're holding funds or you're holding wealth, where there are, physical clues of when somebody may be attempting to take down your security system. This is like a blockchain. It's online, and literally anybody in the world who is smart enough may be able to break a contract. So it's got to have like the number one priority. It's got to have that space like leaps and bounds before everything else, I would say.
That's good. Erin, obviously you've helped me, and Dr. Rod have helped me greatly through some of challenges that I've had with other leaders that are running fast and breaking things. What advice would you give to a follower, right? Someone who is serving under, or someone who is invested with someone who is just running fast and breaking stuff? How do we as good followers, as good employees, as good volunteers, whatever our position, how do we best still serve and honor someone that is just running fast and breaking things?
Well, I can see Erin's thinking.
No, I think she froze there for a moment. You're thinking
probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing.
I was thinking. Go ahead, Dr. Rod.
Look, who's going to speak first?
Go, Dr. Rod.
You go, Erin. No, okay. Look, if you're working with a leader who's always breaking things, my advice is get out.
Yeah, that's good.
It's not going to do you any good in the long run.
That's right. Nice way to say that. Yes. Yes.
But look, leaders do break things. And I think if it's not something that they do all the time, you need to forgive them and recognize that, like you, they go through life learning.
Yeah.
And as long as they learn their lesson, I think that's fine. But yeah, I just don't think you want to get involved with a leader whose whole philosophy is run fast, break things for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Because that tells me this leader has no real purpose. And you know what we're on about, ultimately, we need to be on purpose.
Yeah, it's good. Do you have anything to add to that, Erin?
No, I think Dr. Rod pretty much said it. I would, in general, if there's a pattern there, I would generally take my investment out, take my attention out, take my employment out of that situation, because it doesn't sound like it's sustainable.
Can people like that change?
Yes, but I'd have to say, if I were to be investing anything with them, whether that's my time, attention, or funds, I would need to see evidence that they are doing that. So some sort of ability to reflect, admit a mistake, and improve. And there needs to be some sort of concrete proof of that, I would say, if there's been a pattern established that they're breaking things a lot.
That's good. So let's stay on this conversation about FTX and SBF for a little bit longer, because I do want to address the governance issue, because it seems like this organization was, just a mess. The more they peel into it, the more you go, what on earth? So Dr. Rod and obviously Erin, jump in with any information that you know a little bit more, but Dr. Rod, an organization that is all the key personnel all living together in a relationship of some form. There's organizations that they're just sharing funds between, there's such a mess that just a simple accounting error lost $10 billion. Having all this stuff, having someone that's running fast and breaking stuff, what's your take from a governance perspective about something like that?
Well, there'd have to be a lack of independence, wouldn't there? So there'd be what they call in the lingo standing conflicts of interest. And ultimately, the advice to someone who has a standing conflict of interest, that is a conflict of interest that holds permanently, they probably shouldn't be involved in governance. Couple of principles of governance there. In terms of governance, there needs to be a degree of independence.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that everyone on the governing body needs to be independent.
Yeah.
To maintain independence, I would suggest that you need perhaps a majority of your governing body would need to be at least at arm's length from the management and the direct owners. Also, I think the governing body, whatever shape it takes, it needs to address two broad issues, and there are probably others as well, but two broad issues, particularly in these contexts, in the context that we're talking about here. One is you need to figure out what degree of risk you are prepared to take and what you are going to do in order to mitigate the worst possible outcomes should you take on those risks. So you need to think about risk. That's not to say you shouldn't take on risk. Every governing body takes on risk, but you need to know what you're taking on, and you need to know how you're going to mitigate the possible negative impacts of that risk. And the other thing is, and I think this is what's lacking in any new industry, this is lacking. And also in new organizations, it's always lacking. One of the roles of governance, of course, is to set down the broad parameters of policy and process. Now, as I say, that's always a difficult thing in any startup. I chair a very new charity here on the Gold Coast, and we don't have many policies because we're only very, very new, but that does make us vulnerable. And we're still working through the whole issue of what degree of risk we are prepared to take. And there are different kinds of risk as well. One of our risks, of course, is that we have a CEO and that's about it, a CEO and a part-time admin person. If our CEO were to get sick long-term or have an accident, we're done for. Now, we haven't got a way of mitigating that risk right now, so we have to live with it. But you need to be aware of these things. It's not to say that the risks don't exist. You need to be aware of them, and you need to work up a bit of a plan in terms of what you're going to do about it. Your policies and processes should always focus on the employment and the management of the most senior people in your organization, and how you are going to keep an eye on the financial condition. There's a principle in Proverbs that says a shepherd should know the condition of his flock. And as someone who's had, been in governance boards, I guess now for over 30 years, I think for my role as a director or as a chair, I've got to know the condition of my flock.
Yeah.
And that's really, good. Really important.
That's good. And so at what stage should we be worrying about that sort of stuff? Because obviously looking at someone like, going back to, and I hate to harp on this over and over, but the run fast and break stuff, like they were just making it up as they went along. At what stage of organization should we have a board? Should we have proper governance set up?
Oh, you should do that right from the beginning. And, the board shouldn't stifle creativity.
Yeah.
The board should do all it can to develop an environment in which creativity is nurtured.
Yeah.
And so the board shouldn't really, it shouldn't be a break on everything. And in particular, it shouldn't be a break on the creativity that is the very heart of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So you mentioned about the creativity, it actually draws me back to something that Erin was talking about before, about how Sam Bankman-Fried, not Sam Bankman-Friedman, how SBF for short, how there was a lot of donations to the Democratic Party. It now turns out that apparently he did a lot of dark donations, which is like under the table donation, which apparently is legal or whatever, but keeping it hidden to the Republican Party as well. Obviously, he's the spokesperson of kind of, or the representative. Obviously, he was trying to get to a point where there is some regulation, him being in the driver's seat of that regulation and their exchange being the exchange of regulation and them being the safe place, everything like that. Erin, do you feel like if that was his long-term vision, if he had have at least been able to carry it through, was there light at the end of the tunnel? Yes, things weren't going well now, but if he got to that point, that would have really just like made the company even more valuable, wouldn't have it?
I don't know how to answer that because it was such a bizarre situation. I'm trying to withhold judgment on what happened because there are all sorts of things going through my mind, given that he was investigated already. That whole organization underwent scrutiny, supposedly 6 months ago, and a lot of this was already well into play by then. Yes, he was a huge donor to, it seems like both major parties in the United States. A lot of those donations, there's kind of question marks around what they bought him, I suppose. Yeah. If I can put it that way, there's some questions there. I don't have the answers, but there's so much. I guess it seems like there were so many places where corruption could have spilt into this situation, and not just from within FTX itself. So when I go to answer that question, part of me is thinking, well, I don't see how it ever could have come to fruition given how egregious the use of those funds were. But then that kind of begs the question of how could it have not been noticed, and how could it have been that? So that's just general thoughts.
Let's talk hypothetically then, right? Let's put FTX aside, but there is an organization that they're running fast towards trying to change a trend or be the forerunners of a particular trend as far as, let's call it, regulation, right? And being the ones that are actually advantageous of that. How do the risk versus reward kind of thing of like, how much do we sacrifice along the way to hopefully achieve that thing in the future? Like, can we sweep enough things under the rug that eventually it won't matter?
I just don't think so. And I think if you're at the point where you are committing crimes, because these are already clear crimes, like on the books, there's already regulations around use of customer funds and all of the things that were done. And I don't see how you ever really could get to a place of true value to society or the economy if this has occurred along the way. I mean, even if it hadn't have collapsed, there's probably a point just somewhere further along in the future where it would have, and possibly been an even bigger debacle. So I think if you're at a point where you're committing crimes, you absolutely cannot sweep that under the rug.
So
that's our advice. Don't commit crimes, people.
Don't commit a crime.
But one of the issues I think is that they didn't define their values.
Yeah.
And again, an important point in governance is that we need to nail our mission, our mission statement. And your mission statement is made up of your vision, your purpose, your focus, and your values. And that's something that you should agree upon right at the beginning, because your values actually they kind of define the boundaries within which you will operate. And if you haven't defined your values, how can you expect people to act in any kind of constrained way?
Yeah.
Well, can I just jump in there
please
and
do.
say what's really interesting about that value statement is he actually ends up doing this sort of strange interview with a publication called Vice, where the journalist and himself, SBF, were exchanging text messages. And in this text message exchange, he talks about his effective altruism stuff and also his willingness to be in the public eye around regulation, and effectively says that he did that only because it makes him look more credible, and it gives him the boost of reputation, let's call it, to be able to make the business a success. So I think the thing is, perhaps he had defined his values. They just weren't necessarily very healthy or very constructive to building something that is a good service to society.
Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.